Couple statistics for you. 0.3 of all road accidents in Canada involve a moose. Exactly what the moose's involvement is, I don't know. It's been estimated that World of Warcraft players have spent 6 million years in world playing. And actually, I can kind of see that. A good kill-to-death ratio in Modern Warfare 3, about 1.75. Numbers make you sound intelligent, but I kind of have to agree with Plato on this one. A good decision is based on knowledge, not numbers. When I played World of Warcraft, there were a few add-ons that were almost mandatory. Add-ons are user-created applications that run within the game's interface to show you under-the-hood information. The 3 big ones you had to have if you were going to do dungeons or raids seriously were Omen, Deadly Boss Mods, and Recount. If you didn't have them, you just weren't taken seriously, and some guilds wouldn't even let you raid with them. So, what do? DBM is a timer system. Among other things, it would warn players when bosses were about to do specific attacks and have graphical timers to show you how long until they would do it again. Omen is a threat meter, and it shows you how likely an NPC is to attack you rather than attacking somebody else based on your damage or healing. And Recount, well, that's what I want to talk about in detail because it's a damage meter. For the uninitiated, of which there probably aren't any, but let's be thorough anyway. Whenever you attack something in an RPG, that attack is translated into a number. Now in paper gaming, you roll dice on a table and that's how much damage you do. In an MMO, the game itself actually crunches the numbers and that's how you tell how much damage you do to something. It's a way to kind of simulate if you just do a glancing blow or if you get a lucky shot that decapitates a dragon in one shot. Long story. As you play in a party, apps like Recount uses under-the-hood data to literally count how much damage everyone is doing in a battle. It then averages it in real time and gives a rough count of damage per second that you're putting out in a fight. It measures stuff like total damage points dished out, total points healed back by medics, and a heck of a lot more. Programs like this serve many purposes. A lot of players use them to optimize their rotations to maximize damage output, but more often than not, players use these gauges to measure their teammates. Quite literally, your worth as a player is directly related to that one number based on your role in the party. I wish I could tell you how many times I've seen players leave or just kick people out based on that number. And before you assume this is a Warcraft thing, it's not. World of Tanks has a mod that you can see the statistical win-to-loss ratio of everyone on the battlefield, and then it calculates your odds of victory. Even games without add-on capabilities have scorecard-based statistics available, boiling it down to a net result of your hard work and your absolute worth to one number. On one hand, I get that. It's really important to have some sort of a gauge to figure out how well you're doing. But on the other hand, yeah, it's kind of dangerous to try to determine the worth of a player on any given team based on one statistic. Case in point, Babe Ruth. If you don't live in America or you don't follow sports, please forgive this indulgence, but it's important for perspective. Babe Ruth struck out 1,330 times and had a lifetime batting average of .342. Or how about another player, Reggie Jackson? He struck out 2,597 times and a lifetime batting average of .262. If you looked at their baseball careers based solely on those numbers alone, you'd probably say they were below average hitters. But there's a reason Reggie Jackson was called Mr. October. In the postseason, both players absolutely exploded, Jackson having made it to the postseason 11 out of 26, winning 5 World Series, Babe Ruth playing in 10 World Series, winning 7 of them, and they didn't get there by accident. The Sultan of SWAT hit 714 home runs in his career, Jackson an impressive 563. There's a reason why they're both still relevant players to this day. There's a lot more than just 1 or 2 numbers to tell you what a player is worth. Not to mention that there's a lot of impact that they have on their respective sport. The best example I can think of from baseball. Just looking at his ERA, Hank Aaron was just an average baseball player, but any fan can tell you, Hank Aaron was not an average baseball player. The same thing applies to us mere mortals too. In MMOs, there's a very heavy bias towards looking at somebody's worth based on a couple of very specific statistics. The only problem is that in MMOs, this statistic is more of a show of the gear that you have, not the skill that you necessarily bring to the table. Every MMO that I've ever played has an unspoken rule. There's being max level, and then there's being max level. Some guilds won't even touch you unless you have the proper gear score. Think of the gear score as a number to represent how powerful your gear is. So, just to give an idea, this would be a gear score of 1, this would be about 10, this would be about 25, and this would be about, let's call it 1,000. Okay? Cool. Every MMO player gets this, which is why you see people asking for gear score or similar in the looking for group chats. They don't seem to want you unless you can already overpower the instance in sheer number power alone. Translation, they don't want you for your experience, they want you for your gear. Now, I'm not saying there's no skill in producing maximum DPS, I'll get to that in a moment, but what I am saying is that the game literally will restrict you from doing maximum damage based on the gear you have. There are encounters that you just simply cannot beat, even with superior numbers, tactics, or skill, because you just don't have the proper gear to do it. So what that means is you gotta spend hours of grindy work trying to win a set of gear, and you hope that the rest of the random party that you're with doesn't need it either. But just for fun, let's say that there was a mode that leveled the playing field entirely. Everybody got the same character, same armor, same weapons, same everything. Now could you tell me who the best player was? Well, you could probably tell who can do the most DPS, but maybe not exactly who the best player is. See, this is when we gotta start talking about some intangibles. Now there'd be a name for a superhero group. The Intangibles! Nobody'd be able to grasp it. I will grant that knowing how to milk every drop of possible damage from your character is a skill, in much the same way that digging a trench is a skill. Most of the time it's mechanical, working out a set of actions over and over again to gain maximum efficiency with each repetition. The only thought needed is when you get interrupted by an opposing attack, or a drainage pipe, sometimes both. But the one thing I've learned in team games is that it's not all mechanical. Murphy's Law of Combat, no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. Same goes for every raid, dungeon, and instance I've ever done. Even if you know the fight, even if you know what's about to happen, even if you've got the timers and the warnings, dumb things happen and you have to adjust to the current situation. That's when we get into stuff that's not covered under the DPS mechanic. So let's use myself as an example. This is Spirit. He's one of the main characters that I play in DCUO, and he's what's called a controller. A controller in DCUO is, think of it as like the healer of the mana bar, if you will, or just like a walking battery. The main statistic that they track in the game is your power output, and if your power output is not up to somebody else's standards... Controllers have another set of abilities that are specific to something called crowd control, or CC for short. These are intended to slow down or stop enemies in their tracks. When you do it correctly, a good controller can turn 20 opponents into 5 or less. They can also lock opponents into one location so that other players can use their area of effect attacks on, or they can take the biggest threat out of a fight temporarily. They also have this ability to do something called a debuff. This is a short-term effect that causes a decrease in opponent's stat or attacks. Now in DCUO's case, the 3 debuffs a controller can do reduces enemy armor, reduces the damage an enemy can do, and reduces the amount of healing the bad guy can benefit from. So what this means is that in a fight with a lot of bad guys, a controller's not just mashing the insti-power button. If they're decent, they're trying to lock down mobs, they're looking for rogue bad guys going after the healer so they can stun them or stall them at the very least. They're scanning for targets of big threat to lock them down and take them out of the fight. They're trying to keep the debuffs active so the DPS crew can take down the boss faster, and all this time, they're trying to do this while keeping their own power meter up so they can actively throw all these things. And yet at the end of a mission, we get bitched at for a low power output. No, I'm not bitter, but you get what I'm saying here. People at the end of a mission will look at the scorecard, see one number on there, and then judge your value and worth as a player based on that one number alone. But to be fair, I don't really expect anything else out of them. This is what the chaos of an 8-player raid looks like mid-combat, at least from my screen. So, in the middle of this mess of special effects, weapons and powered attacks, looking at the teammate stats on the side of the screen, constantly dodging attacks yourself, wildly swinging camera angles, I can't blame people for not noticing what an individual is doing to make the fight easier. The times you do notice, it's either because they're doing something extraordinarily awesome, or extraordinarily bad. My take is that it's highly situational. Look, nobody ran out of power when you needed the power. We all got healed and nobody keeled over dead out of context. We got to the end boss, we beat the end boss, we all won. What's the problem over here? Look, we won. It was ugly, but we won. Keep in mind, there is more to a battle than raw DPS, but since that's the only stat that's really tracked, it's what people go by to measure your worth. The same theory goes to things like kill ratios. It only tells a part of the story. When I play World of Tanks, I do something I used to do in paintball all the time called Designated Idiot.
This is gonna be stupid, but I'm gonna try it anyway.
The idea is to make a move so bold that the other team has to deal with you. If you do it right, you can pull half the team off the firefight trying to take you out. This move frees up your team to do other things like moving up the field or taking out key positions, assuming they live that long.
We're done for. Everyone get out.
It's a sacrifice move, pawn for bishop style. I may go down, but I'm giving my team a chance to get into better positions. Sometimes it even works horribly right in the real world.
Should I, or do you want to surrender? Your call!
You bet on.
Nice play. Thank you much.
But there's no way to make statistics for this kind of play in an automated way, so it's not tracked. What is tracked is damage, wins, losses, and battle achievements like getting lucky. Yeah. So is there a way outside of a DPS statistic to show the worth of a given player? Well, yes and no. The thing about these kind of statistics is that it shows what the game designers value as actions within their game. If they were to not track something like DPS and instead were to track things like rescues of teammates or team wins, you would see a completely different dynamic from the players. They would be literally falling all over themselves trying to save their teammates. You're not even listening to me, are you? The other problem is that games have to design statistics that can be gathered in an automated way. You can't have a human referee watching every dungeon crawl or PvP arena to just choose an MVP based on proper maneuvering or key lockouts, so the game measures what it can, and it leaves the interpretation up to the players. Another answer might be to create a more in-depth scorecard that could show numerically what happens in a mass fight, but even that wouldn't tell the whole story either. How would you put a value on things like sacrificing for the team? How do you quantify changing targets to get a monster off the healer? What statistic would be knowing where to stand to not get killed by the AoE you saw coming? And even then, just looking at box scores doesn't tell you how the numbers came to be. I mean, look at this one. It looks like a pretty okay game with a really cool ending, but the box score doesn't show you this.
Backer throws. There's a left back. And Jeremy, I believe. The Giants come to pull it.
Context is what gives statistics their true power. The problem is that in MMOs, you don't have that context. You just have the person that's standing in front of you right now. You look at their gear, you look at their DPS, you look at their kill-to-death ratio, you look at their win-loss record, but you don't really see how they got to where they are right now. You're just looking at this particular number and making a judgment call. Thing is that a player's skill and a player's worth is not that number. I actually ask this in all seriousness. What makes you a better player? The fact that you've got good gear, or the fact that you have a lot of knowledge? Think about that. And one more thing before I go. Every time I hear somebody talk about crowd control as being CC, this is what I think of. It always infects my brain. Now I've infected your brain with it too. You're welcome.